am Ruth Delaney, 35 years old. I once believed that if I worked hard enough, stayed useful enough, and asked for nothing, they would eventually see me not just as a daughter or sister, but as someone who belonged. But then a scanned legal form arrived in the mail, my name neatly crossed out, Mason's typed above it, Judith's signature at the bottom. We figured you wouldn't want the extra stress her message read, and I understood some erasures aren't accidents. They are permissions quietly revoked by those who need your absence more than your presence. Some silences don't echo, they just stay. The message came just as I was peeling off my gloves, the kind of text you don't expect but somehow recognize anyway. Aunt Louise's name. A photo attachment, a short line beneath it, family photo for the announcement. Sunday at noon. Hope you can make it. The image loaded slowly. 8 people, all of them facing forward, smiling like they were aligned with something sacred. Mason was in the center, of course. Judith beside him, her hand faintly resting on his arm. Walter off to the side with that old tie he always wears when cameras are involved. Everyone looked like they belonged. I wasn't in the picture. I hadn't been invited when it was taken. My name wasn't in the email header, but the subject line said complete family image. I stared at it long enough to notice a detail in the corner. A small folding chair had been removed from the frame, the metal legs still visible at the edge, like someone was once seated there but later edited out. I wrote back short, "Thanks. Wishing everyone a good gathering." Her response came 3 minutes later. "Figured you wouldn't want the extra stress of group photos and press stuff, with your shifts and all." I didn't correct her. I didn't ask who made that decision. I took a screenshot of the thread, saved it in a folder on my phone I'd labeled quietly 2 years ago. Proof of being, then I turned off the screen. There was a stack of mail on the nurse's desk, sorted loosely by last name. A thin envelope sat near the top with my parents' return address. Inside was a scanned property document, some small parcel of land my grandfather left behind. My name was on the original line, then crossed out in ink. Mason's name typed neatly above it. The signature below was Judith's. I didn't need a handwriting analysis. I'd grown up seeing that signature on field trip slips overdue, utility bills and birthday cards that never said much. My coffee had gone cold beside me. I pressed my palm around the paper cup, letting the heatless cardboard settle into my skin like it could tell me something. No one had called. No one had explained. It wasn't an oversight. It was clean, like something done with intention. With time. I held the envelope, then flattened it against the table so it wouldn't curl. Just enough pressure to keep it still. Then I folded it once and set it down. I didn't tear it. I didn't throw it away. Some things don't need to be destroyed. They just need to be seen once and remembered for what they were. I closed my eyes. Not to sleep. Just long enough to draw a line between what had been tolerable and what no longer was. And I didn't cross back. Some people learn to speak less. I learned to fold. During high school, I used to vacuum after Thanksgiving dinners, not because anyone asked, but because Judith would look tired by the time Mason's football bag hit the carpet. I'd wash every dish wrap leftovers and refill the ice tray without making a sound. Once I cleaned out the guest bathroom before she noticed it was stained. She never said thank you. Just wiped her hands on a towel and asked if Mason had enough protein that week. He never did the college forms himself. The first time I stayed up until 2 a.m, re-entering his answers when the portal crashed. The second time he forgot the password and shrugged. I started the process over, using my own laptop, Mine was slower, but reliable. I never asked him to do it again. I once skipped a hospital shift to be at Judith's birthday. I stood for an hour near the cake table, holding a gift card I couldn't afford. She greeted people like a hostess in a country club, light laugh, gentle nod, always facing someone else. I watched her open gifts from Walter, from neighbors, from Mason. Mine stayed sealed in the bottom of the basket. Months before that, I emailed Walter a copy of my first published case study, a short clinical piece about diabetic shock protocols. The subject line read, "Something I'm proud of." He never replied. Later that winter, when I ran into him at a cousin's wedding, he adjusted his cufflinks and glanced over my shoulder. "Must be hard to date with all that brain work," he said like he was offering insight. Then he added, "Still good for you. Sounds like you're keeping busy." I nodded. That was all I did. Then, nod when they forgot, nod when they deflected, nod when they implied silence was maturity. Once, after I handed Judith a research award letter, she skimmed the page and folded it carefully. "You should be careful not to bring this up around Mason. He's not in the best headspace." Then she added, "You know how easily he shuts down when he feels behind." I kept quiet. I believed that if I stayed out of the way long enough, they'd eventually look for me. That if I lowered my voice, they'd lean in. They never did. Later that night, I opened the drawer in my desk. Inside were thank you cards from patients, a doodle from a resident, a post-it that read, "You made today survivable." None of them were from my family, but every single one got my name right. Memory doesn't fade, it just rearranges itself into quieter corners. The Christmas card from 2018 still sits in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. Thick cardstock, silver embossing. To Mason, Judith, Walter, and family. My photo is in the bottom corner, almost cropped out my shoulder, half cut by the frame. Someone must have chosen that layout. Someone must have reviewed the proof. Someone must have pressed send to print. I once won the state academic championship. When I showed up late to dinner after the awards ceremony, Walter looked up from his plate and wiped his mouth slowly. "Did Mason make it to cheer you on?" I never mentioned the medal. Judith's voice is easier to remember when it's measured. One sentence timed just right. I had just opened the envelope from the university full scholarship medical sciences track. I placed it on the kitchen counter, angled so she'd see it while prepping for dinner. That evening, while the oven timer beeped behind her, she brushed past me and whispered, "Let's keep that quiet." He just got cut from the tryouts. Then she handed me a bowl and asked if I could set the table. I once left a draft of my first clinical paper on the kitchen counter, not by mistake. I printed 2 copies, one for my professor, one for her. The next morning, I found it flattened beneath the old kettle, its corner stained where the base leaked steam. Judith didn't look up when I retrieved it, just stirred her coffee and said, "You shouldn't leave your things around. The counters aren't for clutter." That year, I decorated the tree alone. Mason had gone out. Walter was traveling. Judith fell asleep on the couch with a half-finished scarf in her lap. I opened the box of ornaments and hung them one by one carefully. Mason, Judith, Walter, each had a glittered name in looping gold paint from a craft project long ago. There was one bulb left white untouched. I held it for a while, then hung it near the back of the tree without adding a name. No one noticed. No one asked. And I stopped waiting for someone to. Sometimes betrayal doesn't scream, it just arrives dressed as a formality. The subject line read, "Confirmation, withdrawal, request processed." I had to reread it 3 times before it made sense. The research fellowship I'd spent 3 months preparing for, the one requiring 3 references, 2 essays and a patient case log, was gone, withdrawn by me. The email on file wasn't mine. Ruth Delaney homecare@gmail.com. I'd never created that address. I clicked Show Original, read through the header lines and traced the IP. My old hometown. Same provider my parents used. The same house where the router password was taped beneath the landline. I didn't forward the email. I didn't call the number at the bottom. I opened the folder I had created long ago, the one no one else knew existed. Proof of being. I saved the screenshot, exported the header, renamed the file, not a mistake, not again. PDF. Years ago, I'd asked Judith to print my application for a public health grant. The dorm printers were all jammed. She had nodded without looking up. Leave it near the sink. I'll get to it after dinner. I checked the tracking 3 days later. No scan, no delivery, no record it ever reached the committee. Back then, I told myself maybe I'd written the wrong address. Maybe I forgot a page. Maybe I didn't press hard enough when sealing the envelope. There's always a way to blame yourself when silence follows expectation. I found an old notepad tucked between my textbooks, still faintly marked with her cursive from grocery lists and reminder notes. Same loops. Same slant. The forged withdrawal letter used the same closing warmly R. Delaney. Judith never signed things with love, just warmth. At the bottom of the official email was a line that stung without volume. We respect your decision and wish you well in your future pursuits. I didn't write it, but it carried my name. On my desk was a red pen uncapped, half-dried, the same kind I used to edit resident drafts, circling words that didn't belong, crossing out weak arguments, underlining omissions. I picked it up and wrote across the back of the original envelope, I have seen enough, not to send. Just to know the sentence had finally been written. Silence when chosen feels nothing like surrender. The invitation came as a printed card, not a message. A thin envelope tucked into the mailbox at work. Dinner at home, just the 4 of us. Sunday evening. Walter's handwriting on the flap. Neat, unbent, like he'd never questioned whether it would be opened. I showed up, out of formality, not longing. The dining room looked staged, table set with real linen, forks aligned, roast glistening like it had been photographed first. Mason didn't speak much. He picked at his plate phone, buzzing in his lap. Judith poured wine only into 3 glasses. Mine stayed dry. No one asked about the hospital. No one mentioned the fellowship. After dessert, Walter reached for a file folder near the lamp. Manila. Creased at the corner, he pushed it gently across the table, one finger resting on it a second too long. It's all here. 2-year certification, full tuition covered if you sign. It's local, no call nights. Easier on the nerves. Judith looked up from her napkin. You've done enough chasing. Nursing is stable. You can still help people without the pressure. This isn't giving up. It's choosing peace. I didn't touch the folder. I looked at the pen beside it. Black, capped, unused. Walter leaned back, voice flat. If you're serious about staying in the field, this is the path that makes sense. The word sense settled between us like smoke that didn't rise. I stood. Not in protest, just enough to feel the floor solid under my shoes. I folded the folder in half, then again, until the paper split. I slipped it into my coat pocket and walked upstairs. The bedroom hadn't changed. Same curtain with the threadbare edge. Same dent on the closet door. I packed what fit 2 sweaters, 1 pair of shoes, the envelope labeled Grants, plus letters, the small wooden box from under the bed. Judith stood near the base of the stairs as I descended. You're really walking away from your own name. For what? For strangers. I didn't stop. I didn't answer. Some questions aren't asked for answers. At the back door, the lock clicked gently as I turned it. I stepped out without looking behind me, and I let the door close by itself. Not slammed. Just a single, soft sound, clear, final. Freedom doesn't always feel like relief. Sometimes it just feels undecorated. The room above the laundromat was smaller than I remembered when I signed the lease. The mattress had no frame. The wooden table tilted slightly on one leg, and the stovetop clicked twice before the burner caught. I hung my coat on the doorknob because there was nowhere else for it to go. On the wall above the window, I taped up an old watercolor one I had painted at 17. A crooked house under a pale sky. Judith once told me it looked unfinished. I left it that way. I worked nights in the ER from 5 to 3. Mornings were for sleeping in fragments and waking before my body was ready. I drank ginger tea instead of coffee because it didn't stain my teeth and felt like a decision. I wrote case summaries on a second-hand laptop with a cracked corner, saved them to a folder called Quiet Drafts. Lunch was whatever fit in my coat pocket. Boiled eggs, a sandwich pressed too thin in plastic wrap, instant soup stirred with the end of a thermometer handle. I didn't cook, I reheated. But I chose what went in. A student once saw me eating in the break room and pointed to my tea. You drink the same thing every day. Doesn't it get old? I smiled. Repetition isn't always a rut. Sometimes it's structure. The laundromat below ran late on weekends. I didn't mind the hum of machines beneath the floorboards. It was steadier than voices I no longer needed to hear. Near the window, I pinned a torn scrap of notebook paper creased from my wallet. I had written it during a training seminar, after a particularly condescending lecture by someone who once forgot my name. You don't need a seat at their table. You're building your own. I didn't share the quote. I didn't post it. I just looked at it when I felt the absence trying to dress itself as loneliness. I ironed my white coat slowly each Sunday night. The seams were frayed in places, the collar soft from wear. Still, I pressed every fold, flat, smoothed the front, folded it gently, and slid it into my bag. Then I lit a small candle in a ceramic cup I kept near the window. Not for ceremony, not for comfort. Just to remind myself I had walked toward light and meant it. Recognition that only arrives when someone else is failing never really lands where it should. The number wasn't saved in my phone. No name, no punctuation. Just Ruth. Call Mom. Mason's in trouble. I didn't call. Later that day, the administrative desk transferred a call to my floor. A woman's voice on the line, brisk and clinical. We're requesting a consult on an ICU patient at St. Agnes Hospital in San Antonio. Referring physicians asked specifically for you. Her tone shifted slightly. Patient name is Mason Whitmore. The room felt smaller after that. I reviewed the case as if it belonged to any stranger. Heart failure. Unstable rhythm. Inotropic support pending escalation. The notes listed 2 previous episodes, one treated outpatient, one undocumented. I flagged the omissions and sent my flight notice to scheduling. I didn't pack anything but my coat, clipboard, and hospital ID at St. Agnes. I arrived through the emergency bay entrance, bypassing the waiting area. A nurse pointed me toward the ICU. He's in room 6. Family's outside. I nodded once. Judith stood by the window phone in hand, but not dialing. Walter sat beside a vending machine, hands folded. Neither looked up right away. I moved past them, pushed open the door and read the monitors before acknowledging the chart. His breathing was shallow but rhythmic. Pupils responsive. No verbal recognition. The attending handed me the updated ECG. I adjusted his vasopressor dose, noted the blood gas imbalance, and signed off on the care direction. On my way out, Judith stepped forward, her tone flat. "Can we transfer him to Chicago? Your hospital has better tech." It'd help. Not a greeting, not a question. Just a request attached to a name they hadn't spoken in years unless they needed something. I handed the nurse my business card. "Have the attending coordinate through this number. I'm available for further medical input only." Walter rose slowly from his seat. "You don't have to be so unyielding. He's still your brother." I looked at him without blinking. "And I'm still your daughter." That didn't seem to matter before. He didn't reply. I walked toward the exit. Judith didn't move. She clutched her purse like a script she hadn't finished reading. The automatic door opened with a sigh behind me. I didn't pause. I didn't turn around. Some names are only used when someone needs them, but mine now belonged to me, and I intended to keep it that way. Some shifts don't happen all at once. They unfold like slow breath, quiet but undeniable. At Southridge they started calling my name differently, not with hesitation, not as a formality, just with rhythm. Dr. Delaney. "What's your take? Run it by Ruth before the protocol's finalized." I never introduced myself. I didn't need to. The stories traveled faster than I did. Someone told a new intern she once handled 3 full arrests in a single shift without calling for backup. I hadn't counted. I just remembered how steady my hands had been, even when the lights flickered above the trauma bay. My office didn't have certificates on the wall, just a corkboard pinned with sticky notes and a single photo of an empty hallway, fluorescent lit, quiet, a mop bucket in the distance. I'd taken it after a 4 a.m. code blue. It looked like nothing, which felt like everything. I began helping with curriculum for residents, shaping modules on diagnostic ambiguity and patient empathy. No committee votes, just a quiet agreement that I should be there. In the lounge, someone left a note on my locker. "Thank you, Dr. Delaney. I stayed in medicine because of your quiet strength." The handwriting was slanted, rushed. I didn't recognize it. I folded it carefully, pressed it flat inside the back cover of my journal, the one no one knew I kept. At night, I wrote reflections on patients whose names weren't in obituaries, an elderly man whose daughter never called, a woman with no ID but a rosary wound in her palm. I wrote their stories down, not to memorialize, but to prove they had passed through someone's care. A colleague once said, "You should submit that." People would listen. I stirred my ginger tea, then tucked the page back into my folder. Listening isn't always the goal. Sometimes it's remembering. I passed a photo studio downtown after clinic one evening. The display window showed a smiling family, their arms looped around each other in practiced closeness. The frame was gilded, etched with the words, "All together now." I didn't stop. I didn't look for resemblance. I didn't search for the absence I used to believe was mine to fix. Somewhere along the way, I stopped needing to be in the picture, because I had learned to live as the one holding the lens. Closure doesn't arrive with noise. It settles like dust in corners you no longer clean. The envelope had no return address. Cream-colored, hand-folded with a Texas postmark smudged across the corner. Inside was a clipped article from a local newspaper. Dr. Mason Whitmore receives Community Innovation Honor. His photo was larger than I expected. Tie-knotted handshake firm, a mayor's grin beside his own. The quote beneath read, "In medicine, The invisible ones suffer most. That's where care must begin. I didn't need to check. The phrasing came from my fellowship draft, the one I had written 5 years ago and never submitted. I found the sentence in a journal entry dated June 14th, still in my own handwriting. He had taken the words, again. Below the article written in neat cursive with blue ink, every family has someone who shines, some just take longer. Walter's voice lived in those lines, smooth, final, not cruel, just practiced. I unfolded the printed clipping again and placed it beside my keyboard. I didn't underline the stolen phrases. I didn't open the truth file. Some things no longer deserved documentation. I folded the page once then again and dropped it into the wastebasket under my desk. It landed softly between a used tissue and a crumpled cafeteria receipt. I pulled up the HR portal and updated my professional records. I removed Whitmore from every line, every Eid badge, every institutional credential. I chose Delaney, my grandmother's name. She never said much, but once when I was 10 and standing in the rain outside a school play, she placed her coat over my shoulders without speaking. That was the first time I understood protection without condition. I drafted a notarized letter to the county clerk. This is to formally confirm I no longer reside at, nor wish to be associated with the following household. I checked the box for severance of domestic affiliation, not out of spite, out of accuracy. Then I opened my phone and deleted the family Hanley thread. I blocked Judith's email. I cleared my voicemail. There was nothing left to respond to. Standing by the window in my office, I cupped a mug of cinnamon tea in both hands. Below, the sidewalk glistened from earlier rain. In the distance, the old neighborhood sat quiet. I no longer remembered which windows were theirs. A single leaf drifted from the rooftop of the pharmacy across the street. It didn't fall fast. It didn't resist. It simply let go. Peace doesn't announce itself. It just stops asking for a reason to stay. The steam from the chamomile curled upward slow and unbothered. I had stopped checking my inbox before 9. Some mornings I didn't check it until noon. The world didn't collapse. I wore my grandmother's grey sweater thin at the elbows, the sleeves just long enough to graze my knuckles when I reached for the kettle. She had once told me, comfort isn't found. It's something you allow. I hadn't understood it then. Now I didn't need to. On the table sat a leather-bound notebook worn along the edges, and 3 unopened letters, 2 marked, professional one with handwriting I didn't recognize. I didn't rush to read them. Not every envelope needs opening. Not every message deserves arrival. I supervised the residents 3 days a week. I no longer took the night shift. I taught with diagrams, with silence, with the kind of steadiness that didn't need elevation to be firm. The younger ones called me the home at the edge. Each Sunday I took a sketchbook and walked into a quiet room off Belmont Avenue. I wasn't there to learn technique. I was there to sit still. The instructor once asked, "What are you trying to draw?" I told her, "Something only I need to recognize." On the bookshelf beside case files and folded sweaters, I placed a black and white photo, just a hospital corridor. No faces, no frames, only fluorescent light, and one shadow moving forward. Underneath a label I had printed and taped by hand, I was here. And that was enough. In the back of my journal, I wrote a single sentence in blue ink. Living is not louder than silence. It's just steadier. That afternoon I walked to the small park behind the post office. The trees had thinned for winter. A child, maybe 7, fell from her bike a few feet ahead. No tears, just a surprised gasp and a scraped knee. I helped her up, steadying the handlebars. Her eyes caught the corner of my white coat in my bag. You're a doctor, I smiled. Not always, but maybe today. She nodded and pedaled off, her balance slightly better. I stood beneath the trees a moment longer. I used to believe I needed an apology to begin again, that someone had to say what I deserved to hear before I could breathe differently. But the truth is simpler. You begin the moment you stop waiting.